teens, if you had a sword drill, you guys would probably win this one. John chapter 12, verses 1 through 9 is the scripture today. Let's stand for reading God's word. We'll read these verses responsibly. I'll read the first, you join in on the second. We'll read John chapter 12, verses 1 through 9. John 12, verse 1. Then Jesus, 6 days before the Passover, came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, which had been dead, whom he raised from the dead. All together. There they made him a supper, and Martha served, but Lazarus was one of them that sat at the table with him. Then took Mary a pound of ointment and spikenard, very costly, and anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the odor of the ointment. Then said one of the disciples, Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, which should betray him, why was not this ointment sold for 300 pence and given to the poor? This he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief, and had a bag, and bare that was put therein. Then said Jesus, let her alone. Against the day of my burying has she kept this. For the poor always you have with you, but me you have not always. Much people, the Jews therefore, knew that he was there, and they came not for Jesus' sake only, but that they might see Lazarus also, whom he had raised from the dead. Let's pray. Dear Lord, we thank you so much for today. Lord, we thank you for the Bible. We thank you for a church where we still open the Bible, preach the Bible. And Lord, we thank you so much for our pastor and the time he spends week in, week out praying for your will, praying for what message you would have him to bring. And Lord, just thank you so much for his willingness to listen to you. And Lord, I just ask that you fill us all with the Holy Spirit. Help us to receive what you have for us. In Jesus' name, pray. Amen.
All right, like I said, normally go a little light on Barbecue Sunday. It's going to be a little bit different today, so my apologies for that. I am cognizant of the time, and we'll try to go short. So, if I'm not funny today, it's because we decided to skip the jokes and in order to save time. Already. Just starting already. That just added 10 minutes on the server. I was expecting it from Judd, actually. I set him up. I was teeing him up, and then you went and took it. Sorry, Judd. I set him up there. I picked my own. All right, let's pray. Father, again, we're thankful. We're thankful for 17 years. Thankful for your kindness, for your gentleness towards us. And Lord, we love you. Pray to bless this message, help it to be a help. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. Here we have John chapter 12. And though, if you maybe didn't catch what had been said here, Lazarus has been risen from the dead. That happened in John chapter 11. And here in John chapter 12, they were now back at his house. And Martha was making supper. And it's real good if somebody calls it supper, I guess. My grandma used to do that, make great food. However, in my house, we don't use that word. If you want to use it, go right on ahead. But it just cracks me up. I'm speaking of my grandma. And, one time I made a mistake. I'm trying to be nice. Canned peaches. There's some things that should ruin your credit score. Canning peaches is one of them. Taking corn off the cob, putting it in a can, and then having it sit there and then cooking by boiling it is one of those things. Corn on the cob is one of the best things that's ever been made. And however, canned corn, no. There's a difference. Sorry about that. That was cooked at our house yesterday. And, but, oh, you don't? And, but I made one time, be nice, my grandma. My grandma was the prototype grandma. If you ever watch Tweety and Sylvester, the grandma, that's what my grandma looked like. Had the brush up, the white hair, and always had the apron on, always cooking. But, hey, you like peaches? Yeah, grandma, I like peaches. Every meal for the rest of my life had a bowl of canned peaches next to it. And here you go. And thanks, Grandma. And but supper was something she always called it. And then, it's completely unhealthy meals. Throw a bunch of fruit in a bowl and then pour that real thick cream on it. What was that stuff? Is it condensed milk? And then a bunch of sugar on top of that, and you had a meal. It was ready to go. Every time I read supper, I think of my grandma. I also remember how she'd go to King's table and she'd end up with a couple chicken drumsticks in her purse on the way home. I think there's even silverware one time. But supper. So here they are in John chapter 12 having supper. And as they sit around, can you imagine the stories that are being told here? Lazarus was dead. If you were to meet Lazarus, wouldn't you have some questions? So let me get this straight. So Jesus, you rose this guy from the dead. Lazarus, what were those 3-4 days like? 4 days. What were they like? Did you actually go to heaven? Did God just make you kind of spiritually unconscious for a few days? How did that work? Because, if you go to heaven, and then all of a sudden now you have to go back, I don't know about you, I don't want to do that. Once you make the trip, nobody wants to make that trip twice, right? Nobody wants to die twice, and but you'd have some questions. But John chapter 12 is a direct result of a miracle working God. Pick it up back here in verse 1. Then Jesus, 6 days before the Passover, came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, which had been dead, whom he raised from the dead. There they made him a supper, and Martha served, but Lazarus was one of them that sat at the table with him. Then took Mary a pound of ointment of spikenard, very costly, anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the odor of the ointment. Now the key actually is found here in verse 9. Much people of the Jews therefore knew that he was there, and they came not for Jesus' sake only, but they might see Lazarus also. And of course, that would be part of the reason you were there, right? Yeah, I'd want to go at the time, go see Jesus. It might be a little different thing than to go see Jesus now. But this Lazarus guy, we got to go check this out. Whom he raised from the dead. Here sits Lazarus. It was just a few days ago, it was his funeral. Just a few days ago, it was his picture on the altar as the friends and family were grieving his loss. It was just a bit ago that he was dead. The love of these sisters in John chapter 12 was not the same as their love for Jesus in John chapter 11. John chapter 12 is a completely different picture than John chapter 11. We all want the John chapter 12. We all want to sit around the table and talk about the victories, and we want to talk about that which was dead, that which stank, that which is now resurrected and to life. We want that victorious conversation. We want to sit around at the table and talk about victory stories, but the stories of John chapter 12 don't happen without John chapter 11. We see people in John chapter 12, but don't realize, and I'm talking about in present life, we look at each other and see people in John chapter 12, not realizing that they went through a John chapter 11 in our lives. We, even looking around, but even ourselves, to get to a John chapter 12, there was a John chapter 11. And so, the honesty of John chapter 11 also leads to it. Let's go back there. Matter of fact, flip back. Let's go to John chapter 11 and verse 1. So John chapter 11 verse 1, pick it up here. Now a certain man was sick, named Lazarus. So this is the chapter before, of Bethany, the town of Mary and her sister Martha. It was that Mary which anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus is sick. Interesting that John makes a reference in John chapter 11 verse 2 about something that's going to happen in John chapter 12. Normally when you have something like this written, it's referring to something that you've already read. If this is your first time through John, you're saying, wait, what? And then you find out in the next chapter. I just think that's interesting. Now, verse 3, therefore his sister sent unto him, saying, Lord, behold, he whom thou lovest is sick. So there's a history here. Jesus, Mary, and Martha had a history. There's just some homes that, you're just comfortable in, right? and you don't mind going to them, and you don't mind, like when it comes to family. There's certain houses you want to go to, there's certain houses you don't. And sometimes, whatever, I look at too many of you, and I see smile on your faces there. Sometimes there's a house you enjoy, sometimes there's a house you don't. Jesus enjoyed going to the house of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. There's a history here. Matter of fact, when he was sick, Martha, went to Mary and says, all right, we need to get Jesus here. And so they sent for Jesus and said, the guy to whom thou lovest, he's sick. So there's a history and a relationship. We need you to know this, Jesus. You'd think that Jesus would go straight there. Lazarus is sick. That guy whom thou lovest, he's sick. Okay, let's drop everything and go. Right? That's what Mary and Martha are expecting. See, if a family or friend messages you and says, you know what? I need your help. What we do is we jump up and do it. This is a type of church where we all know each other. We do that. Recently, even for me, 2 different people came and helped me on my fence, even though they had things going on in their lives. It's funny, speaking of my fence, that fence just about killed me. And never build a fence without wide of slats. Ever. Slats, posts, slats, pickets. Well, you call them pickets. There are 4,000 nails in my fence. 4,000 of them. And that's, doesn't count the ones that misfired and everything like that. And, but, a couple people came out and took their time. And, it's interesting, with my neighbors, it's now a conversation starter, right? You know how when you're doing something, all of a sudden people are compelled to come talk to you? I'm trying to build a fence here and I'll make a friend, right? Not that big of a jerk. And, but it's interesting on the whole thing. 5 of my neighbors asked me for something. Hey, can I have some wood? Only 3 offered help. They saw me out there struggling. They saw me out there kicking things. They saw me out there throwing things and yelling and hollering and hitting my thumb with a nail, even though I didn't hammer anything hardly, but still. And but and I know had I messaged people that they would have come over. It's just how things work. It's something minor like a fence. By the way, for a pastor, you know this for me. It's one of those things that's difficult for me to know when you want me there and when you don't. If you have family that's going through something and I'm not their pastor, then do you want me there? Do you not? And you have to be clear if you don't mind. Yes, I want you here. Hey, you're going through this. Do you mind coming over? And my answer is always yes. And it doesn't matter how awkward, whatever. But sometimes it's just not needed. You don't want me there. Then you know what? We're going through this. And by the way, we don't want you here. And thank you. I get it. And but at the same time, imagine you sent me a message saying, hey, we got this going on in our lives right now. Can you come over now? I leave you on red. I look at it and just keep on going about my day. I don't respond. Imagine that. Or imagine somebody that's your close family friend that you can just kind of text anytime and say, hey, I got this going on. I might as well tell our story here about the other night, right? And it wasn't in the notes, but it'll work. Hey, so I'm towing somebody else's vehicle. If you look at the side of my house, there's no longer an orange square back there. I'm super happy about that. It's been there for the better part of 6 years. And just a friend didn't have space for it, parked next to my house, and I couldn't get rid of it. He sold it, but the guy still hasn't come pick it up. Finally, I'm like, hey, I need this thing moved. And I got a new vehicle with a good towing capacity. And so I hooked it up with the Jeep, used the winch, got it up there, then changed the trailer to the other one. Didn't quite get the car on right. You know where this is going? And so we get over there, things kind of weak, but one super tight, the strap around the thing. And so then we get there and I take the straps off. You know how hard it is to get a car on a car trailer already? It doesn't want to go up. And then when it gets to that little bump before, then it doesn't want to go up that either. So I take the straps off, don't think anything of it, and so what I'm doing is I'm going to back up a little bit and just kind of pull forward and get the thing off because I can't push it off. And so I go to do that, I put it in reverse, I back up very slowly. Instead of just rolling backwards, the car bumps over that, and now the frame is sitting on the car hauler trailer. And I know who I'm going to call, and I say, hey Chris, got any ideas for this? And what we ended up doing is hooking a cable across the parking lot to this pole in the ground, and I just took off driving it. And if George sees this video, we're sorry. And which you won't, but that's okay. And but I was able, I knew if I messaged Chris, I knew he's coming. And matter of fact, I broke other straps trying to do the same thing, but he brought a cable that was worthy of a logging outfit over there. But you have a thing where you can message somebody and you expect them to come. Imagine you email somebody, you text somebody, you give a phone call, and or whatever the case is, and then what happens is they just get up and go. But Jesus didn't. He waited 2 days. Can you imagine that when you finally show up? You didn't even respond. In the mind of Mary and Martha, it was rejection, it was callous, and it was uncaring. But when Jesus was away in Bethany, he said 3 things. He said, this sickness is not a death, but for the glory of God. So when Jesus was away, he said these things. And Lazarus is not asleep but dead. And he says, I have delayed on purpose that you might believe on me. So the people that are with Jesus, they know, okay, it's going to be fine. And but Jesus did not send that message to them. So the people with Jesus knew it would be okay, but Mary and Martha did not. So by the time Jesus showed up, let's look at John chapter 11, verse 17. Then when Jesus came, he found that he had lain in the grave 4 days already. So now the family had to watch as his breathing came short. The family had to grieve alone. They had to say at some point, where is Jesus? They had to watch Lazarus go through this sickness. They had to sit by his bedside. They had to, if we could bring it to the modern vernacular, listen to the heart monitor as the heart got weaker and weaker, and every moment, where is Jesus? They had to watch as the machines are unplugged. They had to watch as the funeral home comes and picks up the body. They had to wait while the body was prepped and to put the body in the grave. They had to order a headstone on their own, and the entire time saying, where's Jesus? So the news comes. Now watch this. Let's skip down to verse 19. And many of the Jews came to Martha and Mary to comfort them concerning their brother. So can you imagine Mary and Martha? Hey, all these other people came. The Jews came. These people that don't even care. But the one person we wanted here didn't. You ever have that? And there you go. Jesus did that. Now watch this, verse 20. Then Martha, as soon as she heard that Jesus was coming, notice this, went and met him. But Mary sat still in the house. Now does that mean sat still like sat quietly, or sat still as in a time reference? Then Martha said unto Jesus, Lord, now here is actually the title of the sermon, if thou hadst been here. If thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. So it's interesting. Martha here is a believing person. She knows from this statement that Jesus could have stopped this entire thing. If only he cared. If only he was here. Question for you this morning, is this you? All over Christianity, people look at God and say, if you had been here. See, she moves past her, but never recovers from it like us. So what happens is, we move along in life, we get hurt, we look at God and say, why weren't you there? And yet we keep on going out of character, and because we know we're supposed to, you know what? We're still going to serve God. We're still going to love God, but you know what? The first chance we get, we're talking about what happened back here. You could have stopped it. But you know what? I'm still going to serve you. I'm still going to walk forward with you. But you know what? We have an issue. Keep on going here. Look at John chapter 11, verse 22. But I know that even now, so now Martha comes face to face with Jesus. Now the conversation tone changes pretty quick. I know that even now, whatsoever thou wilt ask of God, God will give it thee. You weren't here when I needed you, but I'll live with that and move forward with you. She's cried. She's had her time, but now it's in the past. It's almost as if Jesus should have come to her and apologized. Did Jesus owe Martha an apology at this point? No. But yet, we think that God owes us an apology when something bad happens in our lives. But we can look at this in the third person and see it differently. So, what we then live with is no trust in God because of the past. And now as we walk with Him and say, okay, I need you to take care of this, we still pray, still love you, still go to church, still serve God, still do what we're supposed to do. But you know what? We have some problems back here. Now pick it up in verse 23. Jesus said to her, thy brother shall rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he shall rise again in the resurrection of the last day. Jesus does the thing that we're not supposed to do. We're not supposed to walk up to somebody who's grieving and quote Bible verses. Right? But Jesus knows what's about to happen. You know, it's easy for somebody to quote Romans chapter 8, verse 28 when they haven't lost their house. It's easy for somebody to quote Romans 8:28 when they haven't just lost the love of their life or some other thing happened. They haven't lost their future. They haven't lost a relationship. They haven't lost a loved one. It's easy to come up and say, you know what? All things work together for good. Let me give you a pointer. You and I are not Jesus. If somebody's grieving, what you do is you offer your presence, not your wisdom. Because your wisdom, the best thing you do is just shut up. Somebody's going through it, you just put your arm around them. And I tell you what, for this church, sometimes that we've had some loss, and people have shown up. And but we always feel like we're supposed to say something, right? We always feel like I'm supposed to interject somebody. Somebody breaks up with somebody or some divorce or something. Well, there's other fish in the sea. No, just zip it. And well, at least the person's with Jesus right now. That doesn't help me. And so Jesus comes along and quotes Romans 8:28. Now again, that's not something you and I should do. But he looks at her and says, everything's going to be okay. She didn't. It didn't solve the situation, but she accepted it. So what happens then, we must reconcile those times that we blame God. Do you ever get asked, see on social media or somewhere where somebody asks a question, what would you go back and tell 18-year-old self? My answer is always the same. Well, internally, I'm not going to go, it's going to be okay. It's going to be all right. It's going to be all right. What in your heart of hearts is bothering you that you would say if God would have been there? Is there something? Sin and its consequences, watch this, are not God's fault. Lazarus' death was not God's fault, was it? Then why is Martha coming out and blaming God? Yet we do the same thing. We do this where something bad happens, and all of a sudden that something bad happens, and then we say, you know what? God, you could have stopped this. But it wasn't His fault in the first place. And I think there's some times maybe I tell you, God can handle whatever you throw at Him. He's not offended by you being offended by something that happens. You can go to Him and say, you know what? I don't agree with this. I love you. Whatever the case is. And, I'm hurt by this. I disagree. He can handle it. But when something happens and then we pin the blame on Him, I think that maybe we need to go back occasionally and say, you know what? Sorry about that. So Martha says, I'm not turning my back on you, but I have a real problem with you. Martha says, you know what? You were 2 miles down the road. You read the obituary. You didn't even come for the funeral, and now you show up? Jesus knows what He's about to do, doesn't He? But it still actually weighs on Jesus pretty heavily. And so Martha, I believe at this point, says, you know what? You're on trial from this point forward. Pick it up here in verse 25. Jesus said unto her, I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. No. And whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die. And so notice what Jesus does here. Do you believe that? And so imagine being Martha. You don't want to answer the question. Martha, do you believe that? Like when you talk to your kids, and we're okay with this? I don't want to say it. Martha, do you believe that? Yes. Okay, yes, I believe it. She saith unto him, Yea, Lord, I believe that thou art the Christ, the Son of God, which shall come into the world. There's some sarcasm there, I believe. There's some hurt there. Yes, I believe you're him. But still, you should have been here. Right? He is the resurrection. He is the light. And sometimes I wonder, do we owe God an apology? What do you blame God for? Are you unable to enjoy Him because you blame Him? Jesus wasn't late. He was calculated. Here's the sermon. Jesus needs them to know this one thing. It's not what He can do that is the game changer. What's the next line I'm about to say? It's not what He can do. It's who He is. Right? It's who He is. Watch this. Do you have, and don't act too pious on this, I think all of us fall into this. Do you have a friend or a friend in the past that you have a mutual person that you don't like? Or even a mutual sports team you dislike, whatever the case is. And so, Chris and I, you know what you're talking about, who, Greg? I mean, Greg, we don't watch out for that. And, back and forth, always making fun of Greg behind his back, which has never happened. But just so you know. And, but we're making fun of Greg, can you believe he did that? Oh, but then all of a sudden, I'm over here, and then, Chris goes talks to Greg, perfectly friendly. We've been back and forth about Greg. Like, wait, what's this all about? We've been badmouthing that guy. Now you're gonna go be friendly, but you don't say it. But you're gonna go be friendly. What's the deal here? And that's exactly what Martha and Mary have done here to Jesus. Watch this. So, have you ever had anybody like that in your life? Is anybody going to say no? You better not, because I could probably see them from it. Don't scratch your head and look at me like that. Don't make. We're all guilty, but you looked extra guilty on that one, Becca. No, never, okay. So everybody but Becca, and way to go. Hebrews talks about the root of bitterness driving down and springing up, and that many then be defiled. Watch this. Mary and Martha were this to each other. Look at verse 28. And when she had so said, she went her way and called Mary her sister secretly, saying, The Master is come and calleth for thee. And as soon as she heard that, she rose quickly and came unto him. Now notice she says the same exact thing. You ever have something come from two different directions, and something was said about you by two different people? You make the connection, but those people are, oh, it wasn't said. You don't know that was said. Well, it came from two different directions, same exact thing. And look here in verse 30. Now Jesus was not yet coming to town, but was in that place where Martha met him. See, when we blame God for loss, we keep others from Him. Chris, you're not going to believe what God did to me. This is so stupid. I'm so sick of it. And then, what am I doing to Chris? We don't realize how big our influence is. No, I don't blame God. It is what it is. Who is it that hates that statement? Who is it? Is that somebody here? There's somebody that goes off on that all the time. Okay, Brendan. And by the way, Brendan, haven't seen you in a while. Good to see you, buddy. And but I think that we blame him for more than we're willing to admit. And that is a realization I came to myself. John chapter 11, look down at verse 32. Then when Mary was come to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell down at his feet, saying unto him, Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. See that there? Verse 33, when Jesus therefore saw her weeping, and the Jews also weeping, which came with her, he groaned in the spirit, was troubled. Now look at verse 35, Jesus wept. We get this idea, because we're human, that if people are going to blame me for something, then I'm going to, Jesus wasn't at fault. It wasn't his fault. He was calculated. He knew what was about to happen, but yet he was still concerned enough about the people around him that Jesus himself wept. He knew the outcome, and he was still touched that people were hurt. We think that God is distant and God is so unconcerned. And as we go through this life, we're like little lab rats, and God's looking at us from above. And man, you should have taken a left there on that maze, and sprinkle little pebbles over here. Jesus is intimately concerned with every one of us and where we are. Intimately concerned. Here, Jesus wept. He knew he was about to raise Lazarus. He knew John chapter 12 was coming. He knew exactly what was about to happen, but he still wept. It wasn't his fault, but he still cared and was still good in their bitterness. You ever have that? You're bitter, but God still shows himself good? I've had that a few times. Look down at verse 37. We'll finish up over here. And some of them said, could not this man which opened the eyes of the blind have caused that even this man should not have died? Interesting. So, a couple chapters ago, we had the person who was born blind, and Jesus said, they said, hey, who did sin? And Jesus said, this isn't about sin. This person is blind to show my glory, show the glory of God. He healed the blind person, and so now the Jews that saw that are now here. They saw the resurrection, or they're about to see the resurrection, but here, so the man born blind, now we have Lazarus dead, but he's about to be raised from the dead. Look at verse 38. Jesus, therefore, again groaning in himself, cometh to the grave. Again, groaning on himself, on the way to go raise somebody from the dead. He still cares. Don't think that you're in this world by yourself. You're in this thing completely alone. Sorry to throw in more illustrations. I think for Lisa and me, probably the loneliest we felt it was on Christmas break, and she ended up miscarrying, and the people at the church who would have probably been there to visit us, nobody was there. Bob Hooker, who was kind of like my pastor, the way it's set up, was in Tennessee. He couldn't be there, and we were just by ourselves. I went to the hospital in my work truck. What's going on? And just kind of in a daze, just kind of lost. What's going on? I didn't know what to do. And so after a little bit in the hospital, I jumped back in my work truck and went, I gotta go finish my route. And luckily my boss was like, dude, what are you doing? I'm like, I don't know. And but we learned some pretty valuable lessons over the course of those days. Because you'd think, having a miscarriage, all of a sudden, we're going to get mad and blame God. We actually thought through a few things. Imagine if that child never got saved. Imagine if that child never came to know the Lord. What would be better? Yeah, I think that it turned out okay. And it began us, as you know the story that I told at Ashley's graduation. I began praying for a girl, ended up Ashley being born. And so it all turned out okay. We didn't think it was going to be okay at the time. But we didn't blame God. Now watch this. Jesus, therefore, again groaning himself, cometh to the grave. It was a cave, and a stone lay upon it. Jesus said, take away the stone. One last time, Jesus is kind of setting, when we say setting himself up, I don't mean he knows what's about to happen. Now watch this. Martha, the sister of him that was dead, who just said, I know you're the resurrection, I know you can resurrect him from the dead, says this, Lord, by this time he stinketh. Everybody around, Jesus says, hey, roll away the stone. And now everybody's like, no, what are you doing? No, and even if somebody's rolling away the stone, can't you picture a couple people going over there and saying, don't do this. Don't do this. This is not what's needed right now. Grieving family, don't do this. Martha, the sister of him that was dead, saith unto him, Lord, by the time he stinketh, for he hath been dead 4 days. Jesus reaches in there. And by the way, when he says, Lazarus, come forth, if he didn't say Lazarus specifically, I wonder how many people would have risen from the dead that day. All of them? But he says, Lazarus, come forth. Now, chapter 11 wasn't fun. And we'll end with this. But we would never have gotten to John chapter 12 if it didn't happen. Now look back at John chapter 12 and verse 11. What we see is actually a little bit of Romans 8:28 here. And again, when somebody suffers loss, don't go quoting Romans 8:28 to people. Don't do it. Just put your arm around them. Love them. Be present. John chapter 12 verse 11 says this. Because that by reason of him, many of the Jews went away and believed on Jesus. When we get to heaven, we're going to meet some of the very Jews that condemned Jesus to death. Imagine that. We're going to meet, I think, the Roman soldiers that crucified him And then, one of them saw him die and said, surely this man was the Son of God. I believe we're going to meet that guy. And imagine being that guy in heaven. Wow, after what I did? That's good stuff. And so here we find in chapter 11, if you were to go back to Mary and Martha and say, hey, you know what? Jesus is going to show up after 4 days. The grieving process wouldn't even happen. He's going to die. He's going to be in the grave 4 days. We're not even going to bother with a headstone. We're not going to bother with any of that. Jesus says, I'm about to show you something pretty cool. He's going to raise from the dead. Oh, by the way, people are going to get saved because of this. What a good exchange, don't you think? But what we do is we blame God and we keep ourselves and others from Him when nothing was ever His fault in the first place. Let's pray. Father, we're thankful again for our time to meet this morning.